So I'd like to start today's video by rolling back the clock a little bit and actually changing the venue to the state of Virginia, because many of you will remember that in 2021, conservative media became obsessed with the case out of Loudoun, Virginia. Now, if you guys will recall, this case ended up grabbing attention not just because of the heinousness of the crime, but of course because Loudoun County appeared to be participating in a cover-up due to the fact that this sexual assault was allegedly perpetrated by a boy that was either dressed as a girl or was in the girl's bathroom, which was permitted due to the fact that the previous Democratic administration was promoting the trans' agenda. And in fact, this came to a boiling point when the father of the alleged victim at the time ended up showing up to a meeting, tried to call out these people for covering up what happened to his daughter, and he ultimately ended up being arrested as a result of it. And this is very likely the number one reason why Glenn Youngkin is currently the governor of the state of Virginia. The outrage related to this particular case was so palpable that it ended up flipping that particular state. And of course, we now look one state over to the state of Maryland, where a case that is also outrageous, although not as heinous in terms of the scale, hopefully can lead to a positive change there too. And this is what we're going to talk about today. An incident that is completely ridiculous and absurd that occurred in a Maryland school that, for reasons that I will get into in the future of this video, is completely unchargeable, and the law that actually allows this criminal, this sexual assaulter, to get away with this crime. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
The parents of a 12-year-old girl are calling for state lawmakers to take action after their daughter was allegedly sexually assaulted in school.
Yeah, the family wants to press criminal charges, but as Project Baltimore's Chris Papps explains, following a recent change in state law, they can't.
So I'm going to spoil this for you guys out there in the audience and tell you that the culprit behind this particular case in the state of Maryland, beyond, of course, the suspect who actually allegedly committed this crime, is in fact the Democratic legislature of the state of Maryland, who back in 2022 overrid or passed with a veto-proof majority a juvenile offender law that made it incredibly difficult to charge youthful offenders, and under a certain age, that age being 13, actually made it impossible to do so for crimes as serious as sexual assault, which of course is the crime that we're talking about today. So in this particular story, a 12-year-old girl who has been bullied and victimized by this criminal kid is basically out of options and has to return to school unless the mother can pay for private school due to the fact that there is no way to adjudicate this properly in the criminal courts.
This happened the afternoon of Thursday, March 27th.
Julie Wilson
My daughter was walking from dance to her next class
hasn't always been an angry person.
in the hallway of Western Heights Middle School.
But the story behind this letter she wrote to the State Department of Juvenile Services in April has changed her.
I have become a very angry person, unfortunately. I will fight tooth and nail to protect my daughter.
So we get a little bit of the taste of the letter that this mother ended up writing the Department of Juvenile Services in the state of Maryland about her daughter's specific case. And we also get a bunch of narration from the Project Baltimore guy, which, by the way, I love Fox 46 Project Baltimore series. Definitely recommend you check out many of their episodes. And he talks about how she didn't used to be an angry person, but now she's angry, now she's pissed off. And when you understand the circumstances of this case, you understand that, yeah, she should be angry, she should be pissed off, but again, this is the system that was set up.
And she is not currently protected.
Who do you blame?
Maryland and the school.
Wilson's daughter, who we are not showing, attends Western Heights Middle School in Washington County.
Now, it's important for you guys to understand that according to the state of Maryland, the middle school in question actually has about 76% of the students, according to their demographic page, listed as economically disadvantaged students. Now, it doesn't really tell us the state of this particular mother, whether or not she's struggling or she's in that economically disadvantaged category, but it just gives you some context of what we're dealing with here, because it's going to be thrown out later that the alternative for her daughter is to go to private school. But again, 3 of 4 students at this particular school are considered economically disadvantaged, and that does not mean at all that the other 25% have parents that can just afford to send their kids to private school. Now, of course, there's other demographic information, like the school is 46% male, 54% female. The school also is about 37% white, about 25% black, about 20% Hispanic, and of course 13% Asian. Now, I try to cross-reference the racial and ethnic demographics of this particular school with the information on who might be economically disadvantaged versus who isn't economically disadvantaged to give you a better number than just the general 3 of 4 students are economically disadvantaged at this particular location, but I couldn't really find that comparison on the websites associated with this particular school. So my apologies for not being able to be more specific on the likelihood of this white mother being economically disadvantaged while attending this school.
Starting last fall, Wilson says a boy at her school began bullying the 12-year-old and some of her friends. The family worked with the school to try to address the issue, but the bullying, Wilson says, worsened and began to include sexual harassment. In late March, it turned physical.
He walked across the hall to her, grabbed her breast, and ran away. She just kind of had a total breakdown right there in the hallway. She was terrified to go back after that.
Wilson filed a bullying, harassment, or intimidation report in April with the school, which investigated and substantiated the allegations that Wilson's daughter was targeted.
So look, this mom is obviously active in her daughter's life. She hears about the bullying. She ends up going to the school to talk to them about the issues with the bullying. And even though this is all documented as stuff that had been ongoing in the school, they still are not able to stop this one particular child. And eventually he ends up groping her daughter, which obviously causes a very traumatic impact on said daughter. Now, of course, she then takes the next logical steps where she reports the incident, the school investigates, the Department of Juvenile Services investigates.
That same month, Wilson filed this peace order with the Department of Juvenile Services, claiming her daughter was a victim of a sexual offense. In June, the peace order was granted.
And we end up with these documents that saying that they were able to substantiate the allegations. And of course, the Department of Juvenile Services ends up issuing this particular peace order. So in response to having affirmation from these 2 different government agencies, the mom then takes the next logical step. She then goes to her local police department in order to file charges because she wants this person, who again has yet to be deterred by school discipline, to face the consequences for his actions.
But then, when Wilson went to police to file 4th-degree sex offense charges against the juvenile, she was told nothing could be done because the alleged assailant is too young.
If he just is allowed to do this and nothing happens, what is he going to do when he is older? And it's teaching my daughter that it's just okay. He can do these things to her and there's no consequences.
Now, again, everything the mom says right here is obviously true. She is pointing out the absurdity of this particular system where you can have substantiation, you can have witnesses, you can have whatever evidence that she was able to present to get the school to agree, and of course to get the Department of Juvenile Services to agree, and yet there can be no criminal charges. Now, to be clear, this is alleged at this moment in time. Again, we're talking about 12-year-olds. So to be fair, I'm going based on the documentation and some of the evidence that we have right here, but there is a chance that these could be false allegations or false allegations, as the super mayor says.
Off of hearsay. False allegations and not facts.
So I leave that option open, but again, based on what we know right now, I'm leaning toward the direction of the mother and her 12-year-old daughter, and it appears that it's not really in dispute by a bunch of these different agencies that this event occurred. What's in dispute, or what the issue is that it's an unchargeable crime for somebody of this age.
The reason Wilson's daughter could not press charges goes back to 2022.
Juvenile court was never intended to mediate schoolyard squabbles or mete out punishment for childish mistakes.
Senate Bill 691, Juvenile Justice Reform.
That year, the Maryland General Assembly passed the Juvenile Justice Reform Bill.
There being 94 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 691, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed.
Supporters, including the Maryland Office of the Public Defender, argued the state needed to find ways to reduce the number of incarcerated juveniles.
Now look, we've highlighted this law multiple different times on this particular channel. We've talked about how you're essentially enabling juvenile crime, and in most of the instances that we've highlighted, it's usually carjacking, where somebody ends up stealing a car or armed carjacking another person from their vehicle, and yet they're underage. So what ends up happening is when they get pulled over or when they crash the car and they're apprehended by law enforcement, the only option law enforcement has is to drop them off back at their home. And what that ultimately ends up resulting in multiple times, multiple cases we've broken down, is those same juveniles, those same youths going out and stealing another car that same day. So this system is completely and entirely unworkable. It is based on flawed logic and terrible reasoning, and you can see that in the videos when the law was passed.
What we know is that when you take low-level offenders and you take them out of their home and put them with more criminogenic peers, things get worse.
The Juvenile Justice Reform Bill raised the minimum age at which juveniles can be charged with certain crimes to 13. One of those crimes was fourth-degree sex offense. The juvenile who allegedly assaulted Wilson's daughter is 12.
Now look, that's the meat and potatoes right there. The fact that they hard exempted anybody under the age of 13 from facing criminal charges, and by the way, greatly reduced penalties for people who are under 18, ends up leading to basically an explosion of crime among juveniles in the state of Maryland. And part of the reason for that explosion in crime is the fact that now you have a bunch of different criminal organizations shifting their criminal activity into the hands of these young people. And of course, the reasons that we typically see crime from people in and around this age demographic, and that's because your peak offending years are ages 14 to 24, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you first start offending when you turn 14. Obviously, there are crimes that lead up to that, and if you're able to catch it early, hold these kids accountable, I'm not saying I'll lock them away forever, then you can maybe correct that bad behavior. But of course, the state of Maryland, in the Black Lives Matter hysteria, went in the exact opposite direction. And even though the governor opposed this at the time, you saw the numbers, it's a veto-proof majority. This is the law that Maryland has been burdened with for nearly 3 years.
Nobody is going to keep her safe that it's okay for people to assault you.
Wilson's daughter, in the fall, is set to return to the same school with the person she says sexually assaulted her. But she does not want to go back.
Now look, again, we get the perspective from the mother. She's telling us how her daughter feels, and as I told you earlier on, her daughter is expected to return to the very same school where that kid is enrolled, and of course, she is facing similar threats. And essentially, the position of the state of Maryland, of this juvenile offenders law, is that she better just take the assaults at least until he turns 13, then we'll give him a slap on the list, because in reality, he's economically disadvantaged, which means he's an innocent Beba Angel Aladdin who is only groping your daughter in order to feed his starving family. I mean, that 13-year-old or 12-year-old, he's got 6 kids to feed, and you can't expect him to act and engage with the world in any kind of civilized way, because in reality, we have decided that under 13 doesn't matter what you do. But the thing is, it does matter, it does have an impact, and it's really unfortunate that this little girl has to go to school terrified each and every day because Maryland has chosen to be derelict in their duties and ignore those impacts. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know your thoughts down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Maryland letting kids get away with sexual assault. Till next time.